So hey everyone, so here today we're talking about all things attainment. So to start off, what is attainment? It's when we measure where somebody's at in terms of their ability and we say actually are they achieving or are they not? So a first question that we need to move back and ask is specifically what is education? And for me this is very important because it's a necessity to identify that education is different from one group of people to another group of people. So for me, I'm somebody like, for example, there's something I need to learn specifically around learning, and I don't really want to have to go the full distance to find out. If there's somebody that's done it, I want to know how. For example, you got some young people culturally, they're learning a lot. Maybe it's cooking food, maybe it's where they're from, understanding their own journey. And do they necessarily need to read a book about that, or can they have a reason and understand who they are? So to start off, the question then begs us to answer and look into, does attainment even take this into consideration when you're taking a test? And where do things like attainment come from, all these numbers or this data or this quantitative? So people that know about quantitative, it's basically about numbers and what does that tell us and what does that prove? But an important thing here to recognize is that it comes from a system of neoliberalization. So what does that mean? In short, you have public institutions such as education, as we're talking about, that run like private functions. So for example, if you're running a big corporation, you got a corporate company, they're going to want to know how many customers, how many referrals, track KPIs, track OKRs, and track data. They're numbers, numbers, numbers. And these are the things that really that we're seeing in education. Another thing I want to start to say by really then, is attainment neutral? Can it ever be neutral? Because what we're saying is, in a system like this where we are tracking numbers, somebody has to be a winner, and then therefore somebody also has to be the loser, unfortunately. So for example, when I was back in primary school and you had to take your SATs, I remember smashing my SATs. I was there, smashed it, young person, and it's a thing for a lot of Black Caribbeans within primary school. They do very well, and I was one of those. As soon as I went to secondary school and GCSEs, and now you look at my attainment, right? In short, I didn't do too well, but it's another story that we see again for a lot of Black Caribbeans here in the country. So we're saying, if I didn't do well, who are you marking me against? Who are the groups that are doing well? Why is it that I'm not attaining to that group? So you'll see in universities, they don't utilize the word attainment, they utilize the word, and they say it's an awarding gap. So they want to know and say, actually, as institutions, you're involved in awarding individuals, you're involved in getting them from A to B. So when I'm seeing this type of learning, I'm seeing these type of outcomes, I'm always saying, actually, as educational institutions, do they not have a duty to support these young people and get them to where they need to get to that bar and get to that standard, right? And I think it's important then to say, actually, what does attainment reveal and what can it actually reveal about individuals? And therefore, I think a simple and a clear issue that I have with attainment is the fact that it's not neutral. Because then if you have specific cohorts that are consistently represented as underachieving, we're looking at them as a deficit. And there's many young people, many and thousands of people across this country that, for argument's sake, are smarter than me in many, many ways. So for argument's sake, a kid that is from Romania, he speaks 3 languages, attainment doesn't show that skill. It's not valued within that system. And I think that becomes problematic because what we're saying is actually you're behind where you need to be. But as a matter of fact, we know he's intelligent. It just doesn't show up in the way that attainment wants to scan and assess young people. So for me, I'm not saying that grades themselves are useless. I'm saying that grades need to be supplemented with something else. Because then when we're saying there's a curriculum and young people need to learn, if it came from the 1988 Education Reform Act, another question needs to be, can the curriculum and attainment then ever actually be neutral? Because parties have to decide what young people learn, and therefore if we're going to assess them and see where their attainment is, we need to actually think who decides what is actually important and who decides who are the so-called quote-unquote smartest pupils in the classroom. So realistically, I'm saying that, yeah, it does measure outcomes. Yes, it does show where young people are at, but does it really show the full breadth of a young individual? Can it really tell the whole story in short? And when we move forward and we question and we're saying actually there's a disadvantage gap, and as I said, for example, a lot of my research is around Black Caribbeans in secondary schools and secondary education. So I'm looking at this and I'm saying actually there's a lot of young people that are going through a system that disproportionately aren't doing what they need to be. And below them, there's, white working class, there's gypsies, and other researchers may say that they're passionate about that. My major passion is literally looking and saying there's a ton of kids that look like me, and how is it that they spend 11 years of their life within education, but when they get to the end of it, they didn't attain to that of somebody else, and didn't attain to something that in theory can get them forward, get them further opportunities of employment, and then move them into a position where they can go and get a job. And you see a lot of discussion about this phrase of NEETs and the overrepresentation of Black Caribbeans again, and exclusions. And therefore we have to ask ourselves, when we're looking at attainment, are we not highlighting metrics that can tell us that young people in theory are going to become less employed, are going to have various issues, and going to move forward? So in this question and this whole thing around attainment, if we know this and we know there's winners and there's losers, and therefore there has to be some sort of gap. But a lot of the time we find this gap, and we see through a research that it links directly to the household that a young person comes from. So when I talk about the household, I'm saying, okay, free school meals. I remember being a young person. So for context, I was in a grammar school, but I was living in a impoverished area, as I don't like to call them ghettos, but a lot of people allude to, I was living in the ghetto, right? So I was going here, I was getting free school meals, I was being smart, I was selling my my tickets at the time, because I was in a grammar school, people had more money than I did. I was living in, as I said, in the so-called ghettos. They're living in a lavish area, 6-bedroom houses. I'm being smart. I'm trying to say, actually, I'm going to hustle. I'm going to find a way to actually make this money and move forward. But then when we're looking at it now, we're saying, actually, did my intuitive nature ever show up in an attainment? Did it ever show up in the exam? Does it need to show up? Because then they ask, what is education actually for? So for me, a lot of the things that we develop that don't show up in an exam, that can't show up in an exam, I want people to know who they are. So I want young pupils to know, who are you today in society? And that's something that's lost. We don't ever have a real discussion around identity. What does it mean to be, a black individual that's in the world right now, with a lot of things going around? Do they even understand? They're looking at the news, they're seeing reform, they're seeing discussions, and they're saying, actually, there's flags in the air. What does that mean? Do they feel patriotic? If not, what is the result of these things? And therefore, how can we even measure those things in the test that we're measuring them? Because then again, if it's only the quant data, what about the qual? So what do young people say? What do adults say? So me speaking right now, I'm giving data, I'm giving a perspective. But again, the current means of, education and assessing outcomes doesn't necessarily show where they are. And when we push forward this notion of numbers, and attainment, therefore we coincide and naturally start to have low expectations of certain individuals. So for argument's sake, for those that know, I run an alternative provision site. So in my site, we've got a young person, and in theory, he's not taking his SATs. So going into secondary school, hasn't taken his SATs. And really, in theory, he's not attaining to that of where he needs to be. So then therefore, when he moves on to secondary school, point blank, they're going to say, actually, his attainment isn't great. So then we change our expectations. And we had an altercation yesterday. And I say an altercation because I had to identify and allow him to understand that, look, I don't accept shortcomings. I don't accept the short way round. So for argument's sake, if he's trying to make as many deals with me as he possibly can as to why he didn't want to do homework, he said to me, I'll do 20 press-ups if I can get out of doing his homework. And the altercation was, look, I don't sit here, I don't laugh, I don't make a mockery of you because you're struggling to attain to that of other people. However, what I will not accept is a lower standard of effort from yourself. And the key word here, as I'm saying, is effort. Does he fit the profile? Yes. Does he fit the profile when we talk about race? Yes. Does he fit the profile when we're talking about his background and socio-economic background? Yes, he does. So therefore, the reason, again, when I talk about my own experiences about statistics, and I'm saying, I want these kids to bounce that statistic. I don't want them to live up to the norm. And again, when I talked about, this conscious element and from a pedagogical lens, I'm saying, actually, look, I need you to understand who you are, understand that actually you're walking through life and you're not necessarily playing the game, you're matching every status quo. Now I'm seeing a self-fulfilling prophecy. And it's not just with him, it's with thousands and thousands and thousands of young people. Because again, when they get to, let's say, their GCSEs and they take that exam, when they haven't done as well and they haven't got the prospects, and now they're struggling to go to college, and now you're moving forward and you're doing foundation, degrees for argument's sake, For a lot of young people, they start seeing this as the end and they're struggling, and you'll hear the phrase, a lot of kids say education isn't for them. And that doesn't necessarily mean that some people aren't better at being a handyman, because for example with me, for argument's sake, when I've had to do a whole refurb, it's not necessarily something that I like doing, but I'll figure it out. Whereas some people are clearly out of the gate more attuned to that. But I have a problem with people identifying themselves with this lack and saying, actually, I can't. But then when I see this lack, I'm starting to say, where did they find this from? Is it because you always done the test and, you didn't attain again? And you start looking at yourself as, oh, you know what, I'm not good enough. It's this deficit lens that we see. Or is it the fact that the test needs to be changed, or we need to change how we do test? Why is it that when we say about GCSEs, why can't you do a presentation? And there's a presentation element about what you know and what you've learned, but rather we're going to talk about chromosomes in lessons. We're going to talk about physics. We're going to talk about the Pythagoras theory. And I'm in a position now as a researcher and a business owner where, in all honesty, I don't remember anything from any of my 2 degrees. It's only now my doctoral journey where I'm starting to say, actually, you know what, I know this because it's important and it's very much applicable. So again, the things that we learn in the tests that we're taking, is it really applicable today in the 21st century? And therefore I have to ask, what does a change and a rejig, shall I say, what does that actually look like as well? So for me, when I'm saying, okay, cool, there's an issue here clearly around race, clearly about class and access to learning, access to resources. So there's research that says, families that have more means of financial access are able to supplement that, whether it's tutoring. And an issue that I have with a lot of, Black Caribbeans and individuals that aren't necessarily from the state is that they rely on a system solely for the education of their young people. And some could make an argument that this is now a family problem. So how can you actually blame anybody else but yourself and your family? And again, I understand that rhetoric and I understand that argument. But then to counter that, I always say, if a young person's at school from 8:30, 9 till 3:30, surely by the end of it, you learn some fundamentals. But in a neoliberal society that links directly to capitalism, how much can a young person actually learn about themselves? Is it dangerous? And now I start talking, I sound like I'm mentioning conspiracy theories. But the reality is, can you have everybody being entrepreneurs? Can you have everybody smashing the test? Can you even do it when you're looking at quant data? Because again, I said someone has to win and someone has to lose, and that's something that we see in society. But now you see a major uproar because we know that actually there's an uproar now because now the way that the economy is and the system set up, you could blame it on Brexit, you could blame it on, COVID, but now people are actually feeling the strain and they're saying, actually, I've done everything that the system told me to do. I took the test, I revised, and, I'm still not winning. I'm still not winning these games. And you see, I'm talking about winning, but is life and education, is it a thing where, is it something that you're meant to win, or is it a journey that's meant to be fruitful and beautiful, should I say? Because now when I look at my own experiences on my own doctoral journey, and I'm saying, actually, you know what? As much as it can be long because I'm doing it part-time, I'm also running a business and it's very challenging in that sense as well. I'm enjoying actually engaging in a subject and I have autonomy. And I also think that for young people, yes, we want to quote unquote control what they learn because they're not adequate enough to make the best decisions, let's say at 6 years of age or 10 years of age. But at the same time, I feel like they should have more of a onus and authority about the route that they take. So when they go down this road and they're not necessarily learning, I find it very challenging and very difficult. And as I mentioned before, if that young person doesn't do well and he doesn't attain, what ends up happening is, as teachers, as educators, as professionals, right? And this is the part I need you to understand. As professionals, we make judgment about young people. You have a crisis now, and I use the word crisis because there's a crisis around young people that all of a sudden they're not smart enough, and now somehow we'd rather kick them out of school. But I'm thinking, actually, these are just kids. How, as us as adults, can't we get them to learn and engage in a system? So therefore, what needs to actually change? Or if they're not doing well, we'll give them a detention. Or if they're not doing well, we put them in isolation. But isolation to me just sounds like prison. Sit in a room all day, and that's what you're doing. I remember I was in isolation for a week. I was there for a week, all day, every day, and I'm sitting to myself thinking, how am I in a box all day? But supposedly this is learning. Supposedly this is going to allow me to attain and, move forward. So when we look at this labeling and we say, you know what, this young person is not achieving, he's not attaining, I find it very, very problematic. And I think that the language within itself needs to change, and more of an onus needs to be placed on us. And the reason I say us is because we are adults. These are young people, these are children that are learning. Yeah, you can make a different argument when you get to university, but hence why the terminology changes and they start talking about awarding now. So again, when we're saying what needs to change, I'm asking the question of what do we value? What is valued? Is there, so there's some important research, and it's a great topic and a phrase, and it's called community cultural wealth. And I think it's someone around, her name's Tara Yosso, and she talks about it. And she mentions different things that young people come to, let's say, education with. They have different forms. So that kid that I mentioned before who speaks multiple languages, I could make a serious argument that boy's smarter than me. I got an E in my Spanish, and now every week I'm still paying for the last 3-4 years. I'm paying to do Spanish lessons because I want to know another language. When I went to Spain the other day, I've been a few times now, and I'm speaking another language. I feel good about myself. But hold on, he does this. He's been doing this from yay high. He's been doing it on a multiple occasions, but he has to sit here and listen to me all day, every day, and he'll still take the test. And nowhere on that test is that skill of his ever valued. You may say, oh, that's not true. There's a Spanish lesson, there's, a French lesson, and he gets the chance to ace those things. We got DT, that's more handy. But your core subjects, your English, your maths, your science, right? Again, it's very problematic. And then we see things around, let's say, history. And, are these weighted towards a certain group? So, for example, myself, the reason I'm researching what I am researching is because when I'm thinking about history, I'm saying, actually, my dad told me from early, history is his story. So I was being taught things. I'm going to be tested on things that aren't directly, completely relevant to myself. When you're looking at your Mansas and you're saying, actually, you know what? We were up, we were great, we had money, and we was fine. So now, how did I take that back? Actually, the bar rises. As I said about the self-fulfilling prophecy, I can be a king. And what does being a king mean? It means being the best version of myself. It means being successful. I can create my image of success. And in this instance, it was like, actually, success may actually look like doing well in a test. So it still can equate to that within school and education and public systems. But when I've gone through a system, and for argument's sake, I'll tell you, there's a time I was reading Of Mice and Men, and I said, so I'm a black boy, I'm in a grammar school, there's less than 10% of us, and people may say that times have changed, but my teacher who's white is reading Of Mice and Men, and she's saying the N-word now, and everyone's looking towards me. I want to get up and I want to kick off. How is this okay? And I said to her, what? And her response was, in short, I have to read it because it's part of the text. So she was okay with actually moving forward and, so-called teaching me, liberating me, allowing me to learn, but how much damage did that do to someone like myself? So when we're talking about what needs to change, there's clearly an element of a curriculum, and that doesn't just directly relate to people of different ethnic backgrounds. It relates to those that are from here, as you said, a lot of the things around the working class that are here, but they also need to succeed, because as much as I have a focus to see equality and equity, I am of the belief, and I'm real, that I just want everybody to have a level playing field. But then going back to what I said, capitalism, neoliberalism, and the society in this game, is it possible for everybody to be on a level playing field? Some must win and some must lose. So when we're utilizing this word attainment, I struggle. And some of the changes I want to see. So for argument's sake, I said I do have to read a lot. There's no getting away from it. Do I use AI to support me on my journey of learning? So for example, I'll say, I need to know this. These are the areas. And for argument's sake, today and yesterday, I got a list of 256 different resources that I need to read, and I'm going to try and read to get through my thesis. I've got a few years to do it. And again, I'll smash it, I'll graft it, I'll move forward. But then I'm understanding that, look, I'm in a position where I can be smarter and play the game. But for young people, we're going to learn about these, Pythagoras and have to learn these things and remember. And there's people that talk about specifically, so there's a problem around banking theories and banking information. So the reason when I say, literally think about it like this, I'm around £70,000 in debt because of university. And I got a 2-1 and I got a commendation in my master's. And some will say that ain't too bad. It ain't too shabby, right? It's half decent. But then again, I don't actually remember anything. So as much as it allowed me to move forward and get to the next level, but someone would say, well, actually, but look at where you are in life now, you're in a decent place. And that's a personal conversation I've got to have with myself. Do I attribute that to what I learned? I think I attribute it to the process of having to learn, the process of having to apply myself and stay disciplined. But again, can that be done in any way, any other different way? Sorry. So for argument's sake, that same people I said I had an altercation with, I've got others, and they genuinely get very much frustrated because, you know, everyone's saying, okay, there's ADHD, you can't sit down for long. But now I'm looking, okay, saying after 10 minutes, you're struggling now. Let's move that to after 15. Let's move that after 20. But then when you look at, let's say, different techniques, and you want to break down learning and doing work into chunks, but is that a thing that we do in class? Probably not. Lesson after lesson after lesson. So there's a multitude of things that need to change. Obviously, there needs to be a rejig in terms of what's relevant. But to know what's relevant, we need to know what is education, what does that look like, and what do we want our young people to learn. So my message would be, for individuals, if you're struggling and it's where you've got to send your young people to school, and honestly, I have loads of people reach out to me about education. It's saying, how are you supplementing what they're learning with something else? What does that look like? So when they're coming home, what do they have to read? What are they reading? So for example, these boys here, they like football. One's football mad. So we're reading the book around Marcus Rashford to make it a little bit more relevant to who they are as individuals. I'm not going to give them heavy text that I have to read, but I'm going to still let them develop their oracy skills, but I'm going to let them learn in a different way. And a final point that I want to mention is the terminology. By utilizing the word attainment, there's a problem again around deficits, because inherently someone has to win and someone has to lose. And I don't like it when any individuals lose. Yes, I don't like it when they look like me, but I don't want it for somebody else's child either. Hence why I'm sitting here having this conversation. Because again, if your young person's within an educational system, within an educational society, we're here. But the data that we gather at the moment, I've got to be important to say that actually it doesn't come from blame. It's not a place of me utilizing it to blame others. It's a place to say it allows us to have responsibility to learn and move forward. So hopefully you've managed to learn a little bit around attainment now, some of the thoughts as what it is, where it comes from, and how it can change. And hopefully you stay tuned. What do they say on these videos? Like, comment, subscribe, all of those things there. Sound like a real goofy doing those things. But apparently it's important. Everyone else says it on YouTube videos that I watch is important. So if we're going to get traction, like, comment, and subscribe. They always talk about favors. But for me, just lock in, like it, someone that's normal, relatable, but also learning to try and make a better future for everybody else. Until next time, and just reading between the lines. Pattern.